Welcome to my 4-part coaching series, which is meant for interior designers who are looking to level up their business and create a structure that is 100% going to generate successful results. So if that's you, then take out your notebook, save this playlist, and keep on watching. A little intro about myself. My name is Sarah Adnan, the founder and creative director of Elevated Living, and I make a ton of videos on this channel to help you get started on your interior design journey. In part 2, I talked about how important it is to set up that 1-hour phone call with your client where you walk them through your design service agreement line by line item so that nothing is confused, nothing is misrepresented, and that expectations are clear from the get-go. In part 4 of my coaching series, I'm going to talk about how to create a robust and really good design service agreements for your clients. So this is what my service agreement looks like. As you can see, the very first thing that I outline is the actual scope of work. In the scope of work, I make sure that every single detail is written down, whether it means moving one switch over 2 inches or left, or adding another light fixture in the hallway or not. Everything needs to be documented so that you make sure scope creep doesn't happen. And also in that phone call, when you're going through this with your client, you can clarify and say, is there anything more that I haven't included in here that you think you should include? Those are the type of things that you really want to refine so that in the future, when let's say the scope tends to become a little bit bigger, you can go back to your signed scope of work agreement and say, this is beyond what we had talked about. Therefore, anything additional will require an additional service fee on my part. Followed with the scope of work, I like to include things like hours of operation. So many times I get designers asking me, my clients are just not respecting my boundaries. They're messaging me every day, even on weekends, and expecting that I reply instantly. And if I don't, then they get upset. Well, this is something that you can clearly identify in a term listed in your agreement that says you are only accountable to respond to client interactions during this time to this time. And if an email or a phone call or a text comes outside of those office hours, then you will address them back when working hours start. Now, one thing you need to understand that these terms should not be treated emotionally. They should be treated with a business mind, because at the end of the day, you are a business owner and you're trying to put procedures in place which are there to set not just you, but also your client up for success. You want to make sure that the entire project from the beginning to end goes on smoothly, goes on without any conflict, any awkward confrontations, which we all hate addressing. So these are the reasons why we put these procedures in place. And if you address this from the very beginning and say, these are my boundaries, and later on, if those boundaries get crossed, at least you can always refer back to your agreement and stand by it and say, we did discuss this, it was written and signed, and therefore this is just how the expectation is. The other really important term that I like to include in my service agreement is a whole section on purchasing and procurement. So the way that I run my services is purchasing is always charged on an hourly basis. And the reason for that is sometimes purchasing and procurement can be an easy breeze, but sometimes, especially when you're dealing with wholesalers or business vendors, there's a lot more back and forth involved. There's things like final details, there's things like delivery dates, coordinating install. It's only fair if something takes 1 hour versus 5 hours to procure. The other thing that I make sure I outline in that section is the process around returns. What does that look like? If I, the designer, am purchasing everything, and let's say things arrive on site and the client is no longer liking how they look just because they've changed their mind and they want to return it, well, I always make a point for them to know that if you want me to return it, I can certainly coordinate it, but that additional time coordinating back and forth with the vendor is going to be considered billable hours. It's very important that the clients understand that. It's a completely different story if, let's say, an item arrives and it's either damaged or it's not the same fabric that the client had chosen in the showroom. It's fair for you to be a little bit considerate and accommodate that return without charging your client extra for it. If anything, your client is going to be super appreciative of it, and they might even give you a really good referral that will look excellent on your website page. The other important term that I like to highlight is the term around my design drawings. Now, this is something that I always make sure I let the clients know that yes, these are drawings drawings that I have created. However, they are to be taken as concepts only. Sometimes, especially when there's millwork happening, there might be situations in which your drawings won't be 100% accurate. And that's where you ask the vendor that you're working with or the contractor that you're working with that they must come on site and take the measurements of their own, so that they are taking the responsibility of ensuring that everything that they have captured is accurate to when they go back to their shop and start making the item. The last term that I think everyone needs to include in their service agreement is the responsibility and ownership of the contractor. So there's two things that you need to understand. There are some really established firms who sometimes take on commercial jobs that actually hire contractors as their own employees and use only those contractors to execute their jobs. However, a lot of other independent designers don't have employees that are contractors. They always use third-party contractors to get the jobs done. And in that situation, the client needs to understand that the quality of the work that the contractor does is beyond your control. As a designer, you are also the project manager, so of course it is your responsibility to coordinate and schedule with the contractor. But like I said, if certain things happen on site where it's completely out of your control, you need to make sure that it's clearly stated and outlined in your contract. Last but definitely not the least, because service agreements can sometimes be very lengthy, but for me, the one that I make sure I get my clients to understand is how much involvement they want of me on site. As a designer, it is my responsibility to present the clients with a concept and a design of how the space can look like. In terms of execution, there are so many different traits that all come together to make sure that your designs become a reality, in which sometimes you may be required to be on site to supervise something. And that's totally fine, because that is exactly what a project manager does. And if you as a designer don't have a dedicated project manager on your team and you're wearing both hats, then that means that you have to be the one to go on site to ensure that all of those things are as per your design drawings. Now, the question is, do I get paid for my time being on site? 100%. And that's why under my site visits term, I always say client has the option to request a designer and their team to be on site to, supervise a certain install, usually millwork installs, or just make sure the general conformity of the design is there. Then they can do so at the billable hour of X, Y, and Z. So these are just some of the terms that I include in my service agreement to make sure that there's no confusion and that there are no awkward confrontations with the client, because who wants to deal with that, right? And this concludes my 4-part coaching series. I really hope you learned a lot from it. I hope that you took a lot of notes and that you can start implementing these best practices in your business as well. Until next time, bye-bye.